The granite memorial stood 30 feet tall in the center of Silvercrest's main square, carved with names that stretched back 2 centuries, warriors who'd fallen defending the territory, mothers who'd died protecting their young, alphas who'd sacrificed everything so their people could survive another winter. Every Veterans Day, the territory gathered here to remember that freedom had always cost blood. Alara Ashwin moved through the crowd like smoke, invisible by design and years of practice. 23 years old, and she'd perfected the art of existing without being seen. Her serving tray, balanced on one hand, carried crystal goblets filled with ceremonial wine, each one worth more than she'd earn in a month. The elite families of Silvercrest stood in clusters around the memorial, dressed in formal military regalia that proclaimed their lineage and their losses. She'd been serving these people since she was 7, old enough to carry plates without dropping them, old enough to understand that servants didn't matter except when the wine ran dry. Her feet ached in shoes worn thin from constant standing. 6 hours into the ceremony, and the speeches were finally ending. General Marcus Brennan, veteran of the Eastern Territory Wars, stood at the memorial's base speaking about honor and sacrifice and the price of peace. His voice carried weight earned through actual combat, unlike half the nobles present who wore their ancestors' medals and called it service. Alara refilled glasses and collected empty plates and made herself invisible. It was easier that way. Safer. When people didn't see you, they couldn't hurt you. Couldn't remind you that you were broken in the most fundamental way a shifter could be broken. She'd tried to transform exactly once. 12 years old, full moon ceremony, surrounded by other young wolves experiencing their first shift. She'd felt it, that pull beneath her skin like her bones wanted to reshape themselves into something wild and free. The pain had been excruciating. Her fingernails had sharpened into claws. Fur had sprouted along her forearms. And then nothing. The transformation had stalled halfway, leaving her gasping on the ceremonial grounds while everyone else completed their shifts around her. The pack healer had examined her afterward with a grave expression that told her everything she needed to know. There's something blocking her transformation, like a wall inside her that won't come down. I've never seen anything like it. After that, they'd stopped bringing her to the ceremonies. She'd been quietly reassigned to permanent servant duties. Nobody had been cruel about it. They'd simply stopped expecting anything from her, stopped seeing her as anything more than the orphan girl who served their meals and washed their clothes. The memorial ceremony ended as the sun touched the horizon, painting the granite monument in shades of orange and gold. The elite families dispersed slowly, still talking in hushed tones about loved ones lost and battles won. Alara moved between them, collecting abandoned glasses, her movements efficient and practiced. That's when she saw it. Elder Matthias Blackwell stood near the memorial's far side, partially hidden by one of the carved columns. He wasn't alone. 3 other council members surrounded him, their body language tight and secretive. Alara's servant instincts kicked in immediately. Read the room, understand the power dynamics, know when to disappear. But something about this felt wrong. Blackwell was gesturing sharply, his face flushed with anger or stress. One of the other council members, a woman Alara recognized as Councillor Vance, kept glancing around nervously like she was afraid of being overheard. They were arguing about something, voices kept deliberately low. Alara moved closer, using her serving tray as cover. Years of invisible service had taught her how to position herself so people forgot she was there. She became part of the background, just another servant cleaning up after the ceremony. Blackwell's voice carried just far enough for her to catch fragments. The funds won't last another quarter if we maintain current spending. Someone will notice the discrepancies. We need to accelerate the timeline before auditors start asking questions. Councillor Vance responded, her tone sharp with worry. You promised this was temporary. 23 years, Matthias. How much longer can we sustain this? Alara's pulse quickened. She kept her expression neutral, her movements steady as she collected glasses from a nearby table. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't something they wanted overheard. And servant or not, she understood enough about territory finances to know that hidden funds and nervous council members usually meant corruption. Blackwell noticed her then. His eyes locked onto Alara with the kind of focused attention that made her stomach drop. For 3 seconds that felt like hours, he stared at her, calculating, assessing whether she'd heard anything important. Alara did what she'd learned to do best. She looked right through him with the blank expression of someone whose thoughts were empty and unimportant. Just a servant, nobody worth worrying about. Blackwell's gaze dismissed her and returned to his conversation. The group moved away from the memorial, their discussion continuing in tones too quiet for Alara to follow. She exhaled slowly and finished collecting the glasses. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Funds that won't last. Discrepancies. 23 years. The same amount of time she'd been alive. The same amount of time since the Great Purge had scattered the northern wildlands' Luna bloodline and killed hundreds of wolves across 5 territories. Coincidence. Had to be coincidence. Alara returned to the kitchen and deposited her tray with the other servants. The head cook, Mistress Brennan, was already barking orders about the evening feast preparation. Tomorrow was the Luna selection ceremony, the event that happened once every generation when the sacred throne would supposedly recognize the next Luna to lead Silvercrest territory into a new era of prosperity. Supposedly. The throne hadn't actually glowed for anyone in 300 years, but tradition was tradition. So every eligible female from the noble families would parade through the throne room tomorrow, sit on the ancient stone seat, and wait for divine recognition that never came. Then the Alpha would choose someone based on political alliances and bloodline purity, same as always. The throne was just window dressing for decisions already made. Alara worked through the evening preparing for tomorrow's ceremony, polishing silver platters until they gleamed, arranging flowers in crystal vases, making sure every detail was perfect because Mistress Brennan accepted nothing less. Around midnight, she finally collapsed onto her cot in the servants' quarters. Sleep came slowly, her mind still turning over what she'd overheard at the memorial. Blackwell's nervous anger, the mention of funds and discrepancies. 23 years. She fell asleep still wondering what it meant. The Luna selection ceremony began at dawn with drums that echoed through the palace corridors. Deep, rhythmic pounding that announced the most important event in a generation. Alara woke to that sound and dressed quickly in her formal servant uniform. Black pants, white tunic, hair pulled back severely from her face, invisible and efficient. The throne room had been transformed overnight. Silk banners in silver and blue hung from the vaulted ceiling. The tiered seating that rose on either side of the central floor was packed with every important family in the territory. And in the center of it all, elevated on a marble dais, sat the sacred Luna throne. Even empty, it commanded attention. Carved from white stone veined with silver, the throne rose like a frozen wave. Intricate symbols covered every surface. Moon phases, howling wolves, geometric patterns that seemed to shift if you looked at them too long. The seat itself was draped in fabric that shimmered like liquid mercury. According to legend, the moon goddess herself had blessed this throne 300 years ago. It would recognize the true Luna, the woman destined to lead their people. When the rightful Luna sat upon it, the throne would glow with celestial light and mark her as chosen. 3 centuries of candidates had tried. Noble daughters, priestesses, women with bloodlines so pure you could trace them back to the first shifters. The throne had remained stubbornly dark for all of them. Alara took her position along the wall with the other servants. Her job was simple. Stand ready, refill glasses when needed, remove used plates, stay invisible. The ceremony began with formal presentations. Each candidate was announced by name and lineage, her family's military service recited like credentials. Captain Lydia Ashford's daughter has trained in strategy and combat since age 5. Lieutenant Governor Brennan's niece carries the bloodline of 3 previous Lunas. Commander Vance's granddaughter scored highest in tactical assessments across all territories. They were impressive, these noble daughters, poised and confident and prepared for leadership in ways Alara would never be. Each one climbed the dais, turned with practiced grace, and lowered herself onto the throne. Each one was met with a silence and darkness. The throne did not glow. After the 7th rejection, murmurs rippled through the crowd. These were the best candidates Silvercrest had to offer. If the throne wouldn't accept them, what did that mean? Were they meant to continue without a Luna? Keep making political appointments and pretending the throne's judgment didn't matter? Elder Blackwell stood from his council seat, his voice magically amplified to carry through the chamber. The throne's prolonged silence suggests the old magic may have faded. We should consider that divine recognition might no longer be necessary for Luna selection. The council can choose based on qualifications and territory needs. Translation: Let us pick whoever serves our political interests and forget about the throne's opinion. Counselor Vance rose as well, her expression troubled. With respect, Elder Blackwell, the throne's judgment has been absolute for 3 centuries. If we simply ignore it now because the results aren't what we expected, we undermine the very foundation of Luna authority. The debate continued, political maneuvering disguised as concern for tradition. Elara stood against the wall and felt her feet beginning to throb. 6 hours of standing during yesterday's memorial ceremony. Now another 4 hours and counting today. The blisters from yesterday had broken open, rubbing raw against the thin fabric of her worn shoes. She shifted her weight carefully, trying to find a position that didn't make her wince. Around her, the crowd's attention focused on the continuing argument between Blackwell and Vance. Nobody was watching the servants. Nobody would notice if she just sat down for 60 seconds, just long enough to take the weight off her feet. The throne sat there on its dais, abandoned while the debate raged on the floor below. It was just a chair after all, just stone and fabric. Sitting on it while nobody was looking wouldn't hurt anything. The pain in Elara's feet made the decision for her. She moved quietly, the way she'd learned to move through life, slipped from her position along the wall and climbed the 3 marble steps to the dais. Up close, the throne was even more magnificent. The stone felt cool under her fingertips as she steadied herself. The silver fabric looked softer than anything she'd ever touched. Elara turned and lowered herself onto the seat. Relief flooded through her immediately. Her feet dangled slightly. The throne had been built for someone taller, more regal. But the absence of pain was overwhelming enough that she closed her eyes for just a moment, savoring it. The stone beneath her began to warm. Elara's eyes snapped open. The throne had felt cold just seconds ago, but now heat spread through the stone, up through the fabric, into her body. Not burning, more like sunlight on skin, but from the inside out. Then the light started. It began as a flicker, like a candle being lit in darkness. Silver luminescence bloomed beneath her, radiating outward from where her body touched the throne. The carved symbols on the armrests flared to life, glowing with ethereal light. The entire chair began to pulse with energy, waves of silver-blue radiance expanding across the dais. Elara tried to stand. Her body wouldn't obey. She could move her arms, turn her head, but her core, the connection between her body and the seat, felt fused, like the throne had become part of her skeleton. The light grew brighter. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Elara heard footsteps, shouts, the rustle of hundreds of bodies turning to face the dais. Her face burned with horror and shame as she realized what she'd done. She'd sat on the sacred Luna throne. She'd touched something forbidden, and now it was glowing beneath her like she'd set it on fire. "It's glowing!" Someone screamed from the crowd. "The throne is glowing. After 300 years. Who is that? Is that a servant?" Elara wanted to die. She wanted the marble floor to crack open and swallow her whole. She pushed against the armrest desperately, trying to stand, but the throne held her fast. The light pulsed brighter with each beat of her racing heart, feeding on her panic. The blonde candidate who'd been presenting when Elara sat down stood frozen mid-gesture, her mouth hanging open. Her mother looked like she might faint. All around the throne room, faces turned upward, some shocked, some awed, many twisted with anger and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" Elder Blackwell's voice cracked like thunder through the hall. He pushed through the crowd, his face purple with rage. "You!" He jabbed a finger at Elara. "Get off the throne immediately." "I'm trying." Elara's voice came out high and panicked. "I can't. It won't let me. She's contaminated it." A woman shrieked from the crowd. "Lady Ashford, mother of one of the candidates. Her filthy peasant hands have defiled the sacred seat." "Remove her at once," another voice demanded. "This is blasphemy. The ceremony is ruined." Elder Blackwell stormed up the dais steps, clearly intending to yank Elara off the throne by force. His fingers closed around her wrist. The throne erupted. A wave of pure silver energy exploded outward, catching Blackwell square in the chest and sending him flying backward. He crashed into the crowd, taking down 3 other people with him. The light around Elara intensified, forming a barrier, a shield of crackling luminescence that surrounded the throne and made its message clear. Touch her and face the consequences. The throne room descended into chaos. Women screamed, men shouted. The candidates who'd spent their whole lives preparing for this moment stared at the glowing throne with expressions of devastation and fury. Because it wasn't glowing for them, it was glowing for the orphan girl in the stained uniform, the nobody with no name and no family, the servant who'd only sat down because her feet hurt. "This can't be happening," Alara whispered. But the light didn't care about her disbelief. It pulsed and swirled around her like a living thing, beautiful and terrible and absolutely undeniable. The massive oak doors at the far end of the throne room slammed open. The crowd parted immediately, bodies moving aside like water. Alpha Dominic Stone entered. Alara had never seen him up close before. The Alpha was a figure glimpsed from distances, a name spoken in reverent or fearful whispers depending on who was talking. But now he was striding toward the dais, and even in her state of panic, Alara couldn't help but stare. He moved like violence contained in flesh, every step deliberate, powerful, threatening, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that brushed his collar and eyes the color of winter storms. His face could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and hard lines. But there was something in his gaze as he looked at her. Not anger, not confusion, calculation. He stopped at the base of the dais, studying Alara with unsettling intensity. The protective light from the throne flickered slightly, as if uncertain how to respond to him. Around them, the crowd held its collective breath. "What's your name?" His voice was deep, controlled, but with an undercurrent that suggested he was very good at hiding what he was really thinking. "Alara." Her tongue felt thick in her mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. My feet hurt and I just needed to sit down for a minute and I didn't think." "Your family name?" The shame hit her like a physical blow. "I don't have one. I'm from the servants' quarters. I was found as a baby. No pack, no family. I'm nobody." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. He turned to address the crowd without taking his eyes off her. "Everyone out. Alpha Stone, you can't possibly." Elder Blackwell had regained his feet, still looking furious. "This girl has defiled the sacred seat." I set out. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dominic's alpha command rolled through the space like thunder. Even Alara, who wasn't a proper shifter, who'd never successfully transformed, felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. The crowd moved as one, a tide of silk and anger flowing toward the exits. But Alara saw their faces as they went, saw the hatred in Lady Ashford's eyes, saw the calculating gleam in Blackwell's expression, saw the tears on the faces of girls who'd been promised this moment since birth. She'd made enemies today, powerful ones, all because she'd needed to rest her feet. When the last person filed out and the doors closed with a heavy thud, the silence felt suffocating. Dominic climbed the dais steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. The throne's protective barrier rippled but didn't lash out at him. He stopped just outside the sphere of light, close enough that Alara could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. "Hold out your hand," he said. "What?" "Your hand, give it to me." Trembling, Alara extended her right hand. It looked so small and rough compared to everything around her. Nails bitten short, skin marked with burns from kitchen work, a permanent stain of silver polish on her index finger. The hand of someone who served, not someone who ruled. Dominic reached through the barrier of light. It parted for him like mist. His fingers closed around hers, warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle. The moment they touched, the light changed. It stopped pulsing frantically and settled into a steady, bright glow. The silver luminescence expanded to encompass both of them, wrapping around their joined hands like ribbon. The throne hummed beneath her, a sound she felt more than heard, like the purr of some massive ancient creature recognizing its master, or rather recognizing them both. Dominic stared at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up at her, Alara saw something in his eyes that made her stomach flip. Not quite anger, not quite interest, something in between. "The throne doesn't make mistakes," he said quietly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in what might have been an unconscious gesture. 300 years it's rejected everyone. Noble bloodlines, powerful shifters, women raised from birth to sit here, all of them failed. I didn't mean to. I know. He cut her off, but not unkindly. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're here. The throne has claimed you, and you've just made a lot of very dangerous enemies. Can't you just tell them it was a mistake? That I touched something I shouldn't have? A bitter smile crossed his face. And say what? That the sacred throne, blessed by the moon goddess herself, glowed for 6 hours straight for a mistake? That it attacked a council elder to protect an error? He shook his head. The throne's judgment is absolute. If I tried to claim this was wrong, I'd be calling our most sacred relic a liar. Alara's chest tightened. So what happens now? Dominic was quiet for a long moment, still holding her hand, still studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Finally he spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Now we figure out why the throne chose a servant girl with no pack, no power, and no training. And we keep you alive long enough to find the answer. He released her hand and stepped back. The protective barrier of light flickered, but held. Alara felt the throne's grip on her loosen slightly. She could probably stand now if she tried. But something told her that standing would change everything, would make this real in a way it wasn't quite yet. Guards will escort you to the Luna chambers, Dominic continued, his voice returning to its formal commanding tone. For your protection. Protection? Alara heard the fear in her own voice. Or imprisonment? That bitter smile returned. In this palace, they're often the same thing. He turned and descended the dais, moving toward the doors. Alara found her voice just before he reached them. Alpha Stone. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Do you think the throne made a mistake? For a long moment he just looked at her. A small, scared girl in servant's clothes, sitting on a throne that was supposed to save their people, wrapped in light that shouldn't exist. When he finally answered, his voice carried a weight she didn't understand. I think the throne sees something the rest of us can't, and that terrifies them more than any mistake ever could. Then he was gone. Alara sat alone with the glowing throne and the certainty that her life, her small, invisible, carefully protected life, was over. The light pulsed beneath her, steady as a heartbeat, and somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she didn't know existed, something answered. The Luna chambers were a gilded cage. 4 guards escorted Alara through marble corridors, their faces stone masks that revealed nothing. They deposited her in a suite of rooms so lavish she initially thought they'd brought her to the wrong place. Silk curtains the color of moonlight, a bed large enough to sleep 6 people, windows that overlooked gardens she'd only ever seen while carrying laundry baskets, a bathroom with a tub carved from a single piece of white marble. It was the most beautiful prison she'd ever seen. That had been 3 hours ago. Since then she'd heard raised voices beyond her door. Arguments, accusations, demands. The guards had changed shifts twice but remained posted outside, ensuring she couldn't leave. Not that she knew where she'd go. Back to the servants' quarters? After what happened, they'd probably burn her cot just to erase the contamination. Alara sat on the edge of the massive bed, still wearing her stained uniform, and tried to understand how her life had imploded in less than a day. She'd sat on a throne because her feet hurt. Now the entire territory was in chaos because of her. A soft knock on the door made her jump, not the casual bang of guards or the impatient rap she'd expect from angry nobles. This was different, polite, almost hesitant. "Come in," Alara called, her voice rough from disuse. The door opened and Alpha Dominic entered, carrying a covered tray. He was dressed more casually than she'd seen him before. Simple dark pants and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. Without his formal alpha regalia, he looked younger, still dangerous, but more human. "The guard said you haven't eaten today," he said, setting the tray on the small table near the window. Alara stared at him. "You brought me food. Don't you have servants for that?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I do, but they're all terrified of you right now. Apparently the girl who made the sacred Luna throne glow might curse them if they look at her wrong." He lifted the cover, revealing warm bread, cheese, fruit, and what looked like honey-glazed pastries. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you privately." Alara's stomach growled traitorously at the sight of real food, not the cold, basic meals she usually received. She hesitated, then moved to the table. She broke off a piece of bread, expecting him to start interrogating her immediately. Instead, he sat in the chair across from her and said, "Tell me about where you came from." "I don't know where I came from. That's the whole problem." "Tell me what you do know." Alara chewed slowly, buying time. Nobody had ever asked her this before. Not like they cared about the answer. Usually when people inquired about her past, it was to confirm their assumptions about her worthlessness. But Dominic waited, patient and attentive, like her story actually mattered. "I was found at the edge of Silvercrest territory," Ilara finally said. 23 years ago, during the worst winter in recorded history, a patrol discovered me abandoned near the northern border, just a baby wrapped in a blanket. No pack markings, nothing to identify where I came from. She remembered the story because it had been told to her countless times, usually accompanied by pointed comments about how lucky she was that anyone had bothered to take her in. "The patrol brought me back to the main compound. The healers examined me, tried to determine my bloodline. They found nothing. No recognizable genetic markers, no connection to any known pack. It was like I'd appeared out of thin air. Or someone went to great lengths to hide your origins," Dominic said quietly. Ilara looked up sharply. "What?" "It takes powerful magic to completely erase pack scent and genetic markers. Whoever left you there didn't just abandon a baby. They made sure no one could trace you back to them." The thought had never occurred to her. She'd always assumed her parents were dead or didn't want her. But what if it was something else, something deliberate? "The council debated what to do with me," Ilara continued, pushing down the dangerous flutter of hope in her chest. "Some wanted to leave me at a human orphanage, but Elder Blackwell's wife, she was still alive then, she convinced them to let me stay. She thought it would show mercy, compassion." Ilara's laugh was bitter. "She died when I was 3. After that I was just here. A charity case. They put me in the servants' quarters, trained me to work. That was my life." "Did you have friends? Anyone who cared about you?" The question hurt more than it should have. The other servant children were kind enough, but we all knew I was different. I was the foundling, the one with no family, no pack, no future. And when I couldn't shift. She trailed off, the old shame rising like bile. After that, even the other servants stopped seeing me as one of them. I was broken, defective. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "When I was 15, my father declared me unfit to inherit the alpha position." Ilara's eyes widened. This was not what she'd expected. "I was too weak," Dominic continued, his gaze distant, "too soft, too concerned with fairness and justice instead of pure power. He said I'd never command respect, that the pack would tear itself apart under my leadership." His jaw tightened. He chose my younger brother as heir instead. Adrian, stronger, more ruthless, everything an alpha should be. "But you're alpha now," Ilara said quietly. "What happened?" "Adrian died leading a raid against the Eastern Territory 3 years ago. Glorious death in battle, exactly what he'd always wanted. And suddenly the unfit son was all my father had left." Dominic's smile was sharp and humorless. He spent 2 years trying to find a suitable candidate from other bloodlines, anyone to avoid giving me the position. But tradition won out. When he died, the pack bond transferred to me whether he wanted it to or not. "I'm sorry," Ilara whispered. "Don't be. I'm not telling you this for sympathy." He leaned forward, his storm-gray eyes intense. "I'm telling you because I understand what it feels like to be told you're not enough. To have everyone around you see only your inadequacy, your flaws, the ways you don't measure up to what they think you should be." His hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "Maybe the throne sees what they refuse to. Survival is its own kind of strength. You had to live in a world that told you daily that you didn't matter. You had to watch everyone around you transform into their true selves while you remained stuck. You had to serve people who looked through you like you were invisible. And you're still here, still standing, still trying." Tears burned behind Ilara's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "But I can't even shift. How can I be a Luna if I can't access the most basic part of what we are?" "I don't know," Dominic admitted, "but the throne does. And right now, its judgment is the only one that matters." He stood, moving to the window where the last light of day painted the garden's golden rose. "The council meets tomorrow to render their decision. Elder Blackwell is pushing hard for your removal, claiming magical interference, arguing that accepting you would undermine centuries of tradition. He has support from most of the noble families. So I'll be executed." Ilara's voice was flat. She'd known this was coming. "Not if I claim you first." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ilara's heart stuttered. "What?" "As Alpha, I can claim you as my mate. It's within my rights, and it would force the Council to accept you regardless of bloodline or tradition. A mate of the Alpha automatically holds Luna status." "But you don't even know me!" Ilara's voice came out strangled. "I'm nobody, "You're the woman the throne chose," Dominic interrupted. "And right now that makes you the most important person in this territory. whether you feel ready for it or not. That's not a reason to mate with someone. Alara stood abruptly, panic clawing at her chest. That's political strategy. That's using me as a pawn in whatever game you're playing with the council. Yes, Dominic said simply. It is. I won't lie to you about that. The honesty was somehow more devastating than a pretty lie would have been. Alara wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm room. So what? We perform some ceremony and suddenly I'm your Luna and everything is fine? No, Dominic said. We perform the ceremony and then we deal with the 50 other crises that will immediately follow. The noble families who wanted their daughters in this position, the council members who see you as a threat to their power, the neighboring territories who will view a foundling Luna as weakness they can exploit. He crossed the room, stopping just in front of her. It won't be fine, Alara. It will be a war, but at least you'll be alive to fight it. Why? The question burst out of her. Why do you even care? You could just let them remove me. Choose someone appropriate. Maintain the status quo. Why risk your position for someone like me? Dominic was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I'm tired of watching tradition crush anyone who doesn't fit the mold. I'm tired of a system that values bloodline over character, appearance over ability. And maybe, he paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face, maybe I want to believe that the throne saw something real. That you were chosen for a reason, even if we can't understand it yet. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. You don't have to decide now. Think about it tonight. Tomorrow when the council convenes, I'll need your answer. And if I say no, Alara whispered, then I'll do what I can to protect you, but my options will be severely limited. They'll likely exile you at best, execute you at worst. His hand dropped. The choice is yours. It shouldn't be. You shouldn't have to choose between a political mating and possible death, but this is the reality we're facing. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're nobody. Nobody doesn't survive 23 years of being told they're worthless. Nobody doesn't maintain kindness in a world that shows them none. Nobody doesn't catch the attention of a 300-year-old magical throne. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Alara was alone again with her impossible choice. Mate the Alpha, a man she barely knew, who saw her as a strategic necessity rather than a person, or refuse and face almost certain death for the crime of sitting in the wrong chair. Some choice. Night fell, and Alara still couldn't decide. She paced the chambers, wearing a path in the expensive carpet. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and returned to the window seat. The full moon hung heavy in the sky, its silver light spilling across the gardens like liquid metal, beautiful and cold and distant. She pressed her hand against the glass and thought about her life. Really thought about it, without the practiced gratitude she usually wrapped around her pain. 23 years of making herself small, invisible, convenient, swallowing every insult, accepting every rejection, absorbing every message that she didn't matter. And what had it gotten her? A cot in the servants' quarters and the perpetual feeling that she was one mistake away from being thrown away like trash. The throne had seen her. The throne had glowed for her. For 6 hours she'd mattered in a way she never had before. Maybe that was worth fighting for. Maybe it was worth the war Dominic promised would follow. Or maybe she was just tired of running from a life that refused to let her hide anymore. A sound from the corner of the room made Alara spin around. A figure emerged from the shadows near the door, an ancient woman wearing robes marked with symbols Alara didn't recognize. Her eyes were clouded white, but somehow she looked directly at Alara with perfect accuracy. Who? Alara started, but the woman raised a gnarled hand. Hush, child. We don't have much time. Her voice was like wind through dead leaves. They'll discover I'm here soon, and there are things you need to know before tomorrow's judgment. How did you get past the guards? A dry laugh. I am Priestess Morgana. I was performing sacred rituals when your great-grandparents were still pups. A few guards don't concern me. She moved closer, surprisingly spry despite her apparent age. The throne didn't choose you by accident, Alara. And Elder Blackwell's fear of you isn't about preserving tradition. It's about preserving secrets. What secrets? Tomorrow the council will demand trials. 3 tests designed to expose you as a fraud. But what they don't know is that you've already passed the only test that matters. The throne recognized what you are beneath all the locks and seals your mother placed to protect you. My mother? Hope and fear tangled in Alara's chest. You knew her? I knew what she did to save you, what she hid to keep you alive. Morgana pulled something from her robes, a small vial filled with liquid that shimmered like captured moonlight. "Drink this before you sleep tonight. It will help crack the seal, unlock some of what was taken from you." "What was taken?" "Part of your birthright, your power, your truth." Morgana's clouded eyes bored into Alara with unexpected intensity. "The throne knows what you are, child. The prophecy knows. Tomorrow you'll need every advantage. This will help." She pressed the vial into Alara's hand. "But there's more you need. Tomorrow you'll face combat trials. You have no training, no experience. That would be your death sentence." "Then what do I do?" "You learn what you can, tonight." Morgana moved to the door and opened it slightly. A man stood in the corridor, tall, weathered, with the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime in combat. Commander Victor Cross. Dominic had sent him. 4 hours, Morgana said. "That's all the time we have before the guards change shifts again and someone notices the irregularity. Use them well, Commander." Victor stepped into the room, his expression assessing as he studied Alara. 4 hours to teach you what nobles spend 20 years learning. This is impossible." "Then we make the impossible happen," Morgana said. "Because tomorrow this girl fights for her life. And if she dies, a lot of innocent wolves die with her when Blackwell's corruption continues unchecked." The old priestess turned back to Alara. "Drink the potion after the training. Your body will need the rest first." "And child?" She paused at the door. "Tomorrow they'll try to kill you with trials designed for warriors. Don't fight like a warrior. Fight like a survivor. That's what you've always been." Then she was gone, fading into the shadows of the corridor. Victor closed the door and turned to Alara. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "Dominic told me what happened. The throne, the council, Blackwell's threats. He also told me you can't fight." "I've never been taught," Alara said. "Good." Victor pulled off his jacket. "Then you don't have bad habits I need to break. Listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. You'll never be a brawler. You're too small, not enough muscle mass, no training time, but you're quick. Light on your feet, low center of gravity. We can use that." He moved to the center of the room, gesturing for her to face him. "The problem is everyone sees you as weak, so they'll underestimate you. That's your weapon. Let them think they've already won, then strike when they're overconfident." For the next 4 hours, Victor drilled her relentlessly. Not in complex techniques, there was no time for that, but in something else entirely. Reading opponents, predicting movements from body language, using smaller size as an advantage, where to strike to cause maximum damage with minimum force. "You've been a servant your whole life," Victor said as she practiced a dodge. "That means you've been watching people, reading power dynamics, understanding who's dangerous and who's all show. Use that. Combat is just another hierarchy to navigate." He demonstrated how to fall without getting hurt, how to roll away from attacks, how to use momentum against larger opponents, how to turn their expectations into openings. "They'll fight like they were taught," Victor explained, "which means they'll be predictable. You fight like you survived, which means you'll be unpredictable. That's your advantage." Around 4 a.m, Victor called a halt. Alara was drenched in sweat, her body aching from impact and exertion. But something had shifted. She wasn't skilled, not by any measure. But she understood something now about combat that she hadn't before. It was just another form of survival, and survival was something she knew intimately. "You'll still probably die tomorrow," Victor said with brutal honesty. "But at least you'll make them work for it. And who knows? Maybe that throne saw something the rest of us are too stupid to recognize." He moved to the door, then paused. "One more thing. They'll try to make you afraid. Fear makes you predictable. So when you're in that arena tomorrow, remember this. You've already survived 23 years of impossible odds. Tomorrow is just one more day of doing what you've always done." After Victor left, Alara stood alone in the Luna chambers, her body screaming from 4 hours of brutal training. She looked at the vial Morgana had given her. She uncorked it and drank the shimmering liquid in one gulp. It tasted like starlight and promises, cool and bright and terrifying. Power rushed through her like a dam breaking, not the full flood, but enough to feel the change. Her senses sharpened. Colors became more vivid. She could hear conversations 3 floors down, smell the distinct scent of each guard posted outside her door, feel the pull of the moon like a physical tether, connecting her to something vast and ancient. Her body began to ache, not painfully, but with the sensation of something trying to unfold inside her. the seal cracking, just as Morgana had promised. Elara gritted her teeth and rode out the wave of transformation, feeling her bones shift slightly, her muscles strengthen, her very cells remembering what they were supposed to be. When it passed, she was still human-shaped, still herself, but different, stronger, more present in her own skin than she'd ever felt before. A knock on the door, Dominic's voice concerned. "Elara, I heard something. Are you all right?" Elara crossed to the door and opened it before she could overthink the decision. Dominic stood there looking like he'd been running his hands through his hair, his expression worried. "I'm fine," she said, surprised to hear her voice come out steady. "Strong. Actually, I need to talk to you about your offer." Something flickered in his storm-gray eyes. Hope? Concern? She couldn't read him yet. "Come in," Elara said, stepping back. He entered and she closed the door behind him. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The servant girl and the alpha, both rejected by their worlds in different ways, both trying to survive in a system designed to crush anyone who didn't fit. "I'll accept your mating claim," Elara said quietly, "but not just to survive. I'm doing this because I'm finally ready to fight for the life I was supposed to have. And I need to know, are you really prepared to stand beside someone the entire council wants dead?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt, not in submission, but in a gesture of equal respect, bringing himself to her eye level. "I've spent 3 years as an alpha I never wanted to be," he said softly, "leading a territory that still questions my right to rule, following traditions that crush anyone who's different. And every day I've wondered if there was a better way, a different path." His hand reached out, palm up, offering, "Maybe you're that path. Maybe the throne chose you not just for what you might become, but for what you already are. Someone who survived their worst without becoming cruel. Someone who maintained kindness in a world that showed them none." His fingers brushed hers. "So yes, Elara of the Forgotten Line, I'm prepared to stand beside you, to fight for you, to protect you from the people who want you erased, and maybe, if we're very lucky, to build something better than what came before." Elara felt something crack open in her chest. Not the seal on her power, but something deeper. The wall she'd built around her heart to survive all those years of rejection. "Tomorrow," she said, threading her fingers through his, "we face the council together." Together, he agreed, and for the first time since sitting on that cursed throne, Elara felt something other than fear. She felt ready. The trials were coming. The council would demand proof she didn't have, and tests she couldn't pass. Elder Blackwell would try to expose her as a fraud and eliminate the threat she represented to whatever secrets he'd buried 23 years ago. But she wouldn't face it alone. She had Dominic standing with her. She had power beginning to wake inside her. She had 4 hours of combat training that might be just enough. She had a throne that had recognized something everyone else missed. And she had 23 years of surviving impossible odds. Tomorrow would bring judgment and trials, and very possibly death. But tonight, she had this. A choice made freely. An alliance built on mutual respect instead of desperation. The first moment in her entire life where someone had chosen her deliberately, not out of duty or pity, but because he genuinely believed she mattered. It would have to be enough. Outside the Luna chambers, guards changed shifts. In the council chambers, Blackwell gathered his allies and planned his strategy. In the servants' quarters, people whispered about the girl who'd contaminated the sacred throne. In noble estates across the territory, mothers comforted weeping daughters who'd been rejected while a servant was chosen. The wheels of consequence were already turning. The trials that would determine Elara's fate and the fate of Silvercrest territory itself were less than 12 hours away. But in this moment, in this room, Elara Ashwin stood with Alpha Dominic Stone and felt something she'd never experienced before. Not hope exactly, not confidence, but possibility. The chance that maybe, just maybe, the broken orphan girl could become something more. The throne had seen it. Dominic was beginning to see it. Morgana and Victor had given her tools. Tomorrow she would have to prove it to everyone else, or die trying. Dawn arrived with the drums again. Deeper this time, slower, the rhythm of judgment rather than celebration. Elara woke to that sound and knew her life would be decided today. 3 trials. 3 chances to prove the throne hadn't made a mistake. 3 opportunities for her enemies to expose her as the fraud they believed her to be. She dressed in clothes that had been left outside her door during the night. Not servant attire this time, but something between warrior and diplomat. Black leather pants fitted for movement. A tunic of deep blue marked with silver thread along the collar. Boots that actually fit, sturdy and broken in, clearly borrowed from someone who understood combat. The mark on her chest, the crescent moon wrapped around a star that she'd always thought was just a birthmark, pulsed with warmth beneath the fabric. Whatever Morgana's potion had unlocked last night, it was still active. Alara could feel it humming through her veins. Not full power, not complete access, but enough to know that something fundamental had changed. She studied herself in the mirror. Same face, same body, but different eyes. Yesterday they'd been the eyes of someone who'd learned to expect nothing. Today they held something else. Not confidence exactly, more like readiness. The look of someone who'd decided to stop apologizing for existing. The guards came for her at first light, 4 of them, armed and silent. They escorted her through corridors already lined with spectators. Word had spread. The entire territory wanted to witness what happened to the servant girl who dared touch the sacred throne. Their faces blurred together as Alara walked past, some curious, some hostile, many eager for her failure so their lives could return to normal, so the natural order could be restored. The ceremonial arena had been prepared overnight. It was an ancient space carved into the earth itself, with tiered stone seating rising on all sides. The floor was packed dirt, stained dark with blood from countless trials throughout Silvercrest's history. In the center, 3 stations had been erected, one for each test she would face. The council sat in an elevated box overlooking everything. Elder Matthias Blackwell occupied the central seat like a king preparing to watch gladiators. Beside him, the noble families arranged themselves in order of status and influence, all dressed in their finest, treating this like entertainment rather than a woman fighting for her life. Dominic stood near the arena entrance. When Alara approached, he caught her hand briefly. No words. They'd said everything that mattered last night. But his touch steadied her, reminded her she wasn't facing this alone. "The accused will enter the arena." Blackwell's voice boomed across the space, magically amplified. "Let the trials begin." Alara walked to the center, her head high despite the fear churning in her stomach. The crowd's noise swelled around her, jeers and cheers mixing into an incomprehensible roar. She turned slowly, taking in the faces. So many people who'd ignored her for 23 years, now riveted by her existence. "The first trial," Blackwell announced, "will test combat prowess. Aluna must be able to defend her pack against threats. She will face 3 opponents of increasing difficulty, defeat them all, or be defeated and removed from consideration. 3 opponents." Alara's mouth went dry. She'd received exactly 4 hours of actual combat training from Commander Victor Cross last night after Dominic left her chambers. 4 hours to learn what nobles spent their entire lives mastering. But Victor had been smart about it. He hadn't tried to teach her complex techniques. Instead, he'd focused on something else entirely. "You'll never be a brawler," he'd told her, circling while she tried and failed to land a hit. "You're too small, not enough muscle mass, no training time, but you're quick, light on your feet, low center of gravity. We can use that." What he'd really taught her was something she already knew from 23 years of servant work. How to read people, how to predict their movements, how to turn their expectations against them. "The problem is everyone sees you as weak," Victor had said, "so they'll underestimate you. That's your weapon. Let them think they've already won, then strike when they're overconfident." A gate on the far side of the arena opened. Her first opponent emerged, Celeste Ashford, the blonde candidate who'd been presenting when Alara accidentally sat on the throne. She wore light leather armor designed for mobility, a short sword strapped to her hip. She'd trained for combat her entire life. This was her element. "I volunteered for this," Celeste called across the arena, her voice carrying clearly. "I want everyone to see what happens when a pretender faces real skill." She drew her sword with practiced ease. The blade caught the morning light, sharp and ready. Alara had no weapon. That was probably intentional. They wanted to see if her supposed Luna powers could compensate for having nothing to fight with. Celeste attacked first, fast and precise, exactly as Victor had predicted nobles would fight. Her blade whistled through the air where Alara's throat had been a second earlier. Alara twisted away, using her smaller size to dodge. But Celeste had anticipated the movement. Her boot caught Alara's ribs, sending her sprawling. Pain exploded through her side. The crowd roared approval. Alara rolled as Celeste's sword stabbed into the dirt where she'd been. She came up on her feet, gasping, feeling the power Morgana's potion had unlocked surge in response to the threat. Her hands began to glow with silver light. "Parlor tricks," Celeste sneered, circling. "You can't even shift properly. What kind of Luna can't shift?" The old shame tried to rise, but Alara pushed it down. She wasn't broken. She was different. The prophecy had said so. The throne had recognized it. Celeste lunged again. This time Alara raised her glowing hands and the light formed a shield, exactly as it had yesterday in the throne room. The sword struck the barrier and deflected with a shower of silver sparks. Celeste's eyes widened. She attacked again, faster, striking from multiple angles. Each time the shield reformed, protecting Alara. But maintaining it was exhausting. She could feel her power draining, the seal not yet fully broken, not strong enough to sustain this level of output for long. She needed to end this quickly. Victor's words echoed in her mind. Use your advantages. You're quick, light on your feet. Make them come to you, then strike when they're off balance. Alara dropped the shield and ran. Not away, but in a circle around Celeste, forcing the other woman to turn constantly to track her movement. Celeste was good, but she was also armored, carrying a sword. Alara was unencumbered, faster, more agile. On her third pass, Celeste swung wide, overcommitting to the strike. Alara ducked under the blade and drove her glowing fist into Celeste's solar plexus. Not with human strength, but channeling the Luna power through the blow the way Victor had shown her. The impact sent Celeste flying backward. She crashed into the arena wall and slumped unconscious. The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in outrage. Alara stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard, her hands still glowing. She'd won. One opponent down. "Impressive," Blackwell said, though his tone suggested he'd swallowed something bitter. "Second opponent, enter." The gate opened again. This time a massive man emerged, easily as large as Victor, covered in scars and wearing the expression of someone who killed for a living. He carried no weapon because he didn't need one. His hands were registered as lethal weapons themselves. He didn't speak, didn't posture, just moved toward Alara with the steady inevitability of death itself. Alara's power was already depleted from the first fight. She could feel it flickering, struggling to maintain even basic enhancement. This opponent was smarter than Celeste. He didn't rush in, didn't give her openings. He advanced slowly, cutting off escape routes, forcing her into a corner. When he attacked, it was with brutal efficiency. His fist connected with her shoulder before she could dodge, spinning her around. Her attempted shield formed too slowly. He punched through it, his knuckles catching her temple. Stars exploded across Alara's vision. She tasted blood. The crowd's noise became distant, muffled. "Get up," she told herself. "You promised Dominic you'd fight. You promised yourself you'd stop being invisible." But her body wasn't cooperating. The man grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off the ground with one hand. His grip tightened, cutting off her air. In the stands, she could see Lady Ashford smiling with savage satisfaction. Could see Elder Blackwell leaning forward, anticipating her death. Could see Dominic trying to climb into the arena, held back by guards. Her vision began to gray at the edges. This was it. She'd survived 23 years of rejection and hardship, had finally discovered who she was, had shared one perfect moment with someone who chose her, and she was going to die in the dirt, strangled by a man whose name she didn't even know. No. Something inside her roared in defiance. Not human, not quite wolf, but something ancient and vast and absolutely unwilling to surrender. The mark of the moon, blessed on her chest, erupted with light so bright it was blinding. Power exploded from Alara's body. Not controlled or directed, just raw desperation made manifest. The man was thrown backward with enough force to crater the arena wall. Alara collapsed to her hands and knees, gasping for air. Silver light poured from her skin like she'd become a star fallen to earth. She could feel it now. The final barriers of the seal her mother had placed shattering completely. All the power that had been locked away, all the abilities that made her what she was, flooding through her system at once. It was too much, too fast. Her body wasn't ready for this volume of raw power. But it was her only chance. Alara pushed herself to her feet, silver flames wrapping around her arms. The massive man recovered, shook off the impact, and charged again because he was paid to kill, and he was very good at his job. This time Alara didn't defend, she attacked. She moved faster than human eyes could track, her luniform partially manifesting, not fully transformed, but enhanced, stronger, more. She struck him once, twice, 3 times, each blow channeling power she was barely controlling. The man tried to grab her again, but she was smoke and moonlight now, impossible to catch. The 4th strike dropped him. He hit the ground and didn't rise. Alara stood over him, chest heaving, her whole body glowing with barely contained power. The arena had gone completely silent. "Third opponent," Blackwell said, his voice tight. "Enter now." The gate didn't open. Blackwell's face darkened. "I said send in the 3rd opponent." Still nothing. Commander Victor Cross's voice carried from the stands. "There is no 3rd opponent, Elder Blackwell. You only prepared 2. If you want a 3rd, you'll have to face her yourself." The challenge hung in the air, dangerous and pointed. Blackwell couldn't fight her. He was counsel, not a warrior, and refusing to continue after she'd defeated 2 opponents would make it clear this trial had been designed to kill her rather than test her. "The combat trial is complete," Dominic's voice announced. He stepped into the arena, moving to stand beside Alara. His presence was a statement. She was under his protection. She has proven her ability to defend the pack. We proceed to the 2nd trial. Blackwell looked like he wanted to argue, but other council members were nodding, murmuring agreement. He'd lost this round, and they both knew it. "Very well." His voice was cold. The 2nd trial tests strategic thinking. The accused will be presented with a scenario and must demonstrate her ability to make sound leadership decisions under pressure. A large table was brought into the arena, covered with a map of the territory and surrounding regions. Tokens and markers indicated pack positions, resources, threats. Alara recognized it immediately. A strategic planning exercise, the kind nobles trained for from childhood. She'd never seen one before yesterday. Blackwell descended from his box to stand at the table, clearly planning to control this trial personally. "The scenario," he began. "The Eastern Territory has launched a surprise attack on our borders. Their forces outnumber ours 2 to 1. Simultaneously, a plague has broken out in our southern villages, requiring healers and resources. You have limited warriors and even more limited supplies. What do you do?" It was a nightmare scenario, the kind with no good answers, only varying degrees of loss. Alara stared at the map, feeling the weight of expectation crushing down on her. This wasn't her strength. She didn't know military strategy, didn't understand supply chains or tactical positioning in the way these nobles did. But she understood people, she understood survival, and she understood that sometimes the obvious answer was the wrong one. More importantly, she understood something else. Something she'd noticed yesterday at the Veterans Memorial when she'd been invisible enough to overhear things she wasn't supposed to hear. Alara looked up from the map and met Blackwell's eyes directly. "Before I answer your scenario," she said, her voice carrying across the silent arena, "I have a question about territory finances." The crowd murmured, confused. Blackwell's face went carefully blank. "This is a strategy trial," he said, "not a financial audit." "You're asking me to make resource allocation decisions," Alara continued, moving around the table so she could see both Blackwell and the council clearly. "But I can't make sound decisions about limited resources without understanding where those resources went." She gestured to the map. "You say we have limited warriors and supplies, but Silvercrest is one of the wealthiest territories in the region. Our war fund should be more than adequate. So where did the money go?" Blackwell's jaw tightened. "This is not relevant to the trial." "I think it's extremely relevant." Alara pulled something from inside her tunic, a folded document she'd found in her chambers this morning, delivered by Morgana through means Alara didn't understand. "Elder Blackwell, when did you purchase your estate in the Eastern Highlands, the one worth approximately $10 million? The crowd erupted. Blackwell's face went from blank to furious in an instant. "How dare you? This is slander, fabrication, dark magic designed to discredit this council." "Is it?" Alara unfolded the document, holding it up. "Because I have the deed right here, purchased 23 years ago, the same year the Great Purge scattered the northern wildlands bloodline, the same year the war fund mysteriously developed a deficit that's never been explained." She looked past Blackwell to the other council members, Councillor Vance in particular, who'd been arguing with Blackwell at the memorial. "How much did they pay you to look the other way?" Alara asked quietly. "Or were you in on it from the beginning?" Vance's face had gone pale. "This is I never. The financial reports were sealed by council vote. Sealed to hide embezzlement, Elara said. She placed the document on the strategic map, covering Blackwell's impossible scenario. My mother, Luna Serafina Ashwin of the Northern Wildlands, was investigating territory finances 23 years ago. She found evidence of massive theft, war funds diverted to private accounts, resources meant for pack defense lining the pockets of council members. She looked directly at Blackwell. And when she confronted you about it, you had her killed. Called it a rogue Luna gone mad. Framed the entire Great Purge as necessary protection against dangerous Luna power. But it was never about power. It was about covering up your theft. The arena had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on Blackwell waiting for his response. You have no proof, he said, but his voice shook slightly. These are the desperate accusations of a girl facing failure. Elara pulled out another document, then explained this. A ledger showing 23 years of continued embezzlement. $50 million diverted from war funds, infrastructure projects, emergency reserves, distributed among you and your co-conspirators. She spread the pages across the table, all documented, all traceable, all encoded in my mother's genetic memory, and unlocked when the throne recognized me. That's impossible, someone shouted from the crowd. Genetic memory isn't real. It is when you're Luna bloodline, Priestess Morgana's voice called from somewhere in the stands. The ancient Lunas could encode information at the cellular level, a safeguard against exactly this kind of corruption. Dominic had moved to the table, was examining the documents with an expression that shifted from shock to cold fury. These transaction records, he said quietly, they match deposits into accounts I've been investigating for months, unexplained wealth among council members that never added up. He looked at Blackwell. You've been stealing from us for over 2 decades, weakening our defenses, forcing soldiers to fight with inadequate equipment. And when Luna Serafina discovered it, you murdered her and 200 others to hide your crime. Blackwell's face had gone from furious to calculating. Fine. Yes, I did what was necessary to maintain stability. Serafina would have destabilized the entire territory by exposing this. We would have faced rebellion, chaos, possible invasion from enemies who saw us as weak. He straightened, addressing the crowd now instead of Elara. I made a hard choice for the greater good. Sometimes leaders must do terrible things to protect their people. You mean to protect your wealth? Elara said. To maintain your power. My mother died trying to save this territory from corruption. You killed her to preserve it. The crowd was erupting now, people shouting over each other. Guards moved to restore order but couldn't contain the chaos. Public trials were supposed to be controlled affairs. This had become something else entirely. Blackwell must have had contingency plans for this exact scenario. He raised his hand, and 20 guards who'd been positioned around the arena suddenly moved in coordinated fashion. Not toward Elara, but toward the exit gates, sealing them. Another group surrounded the council box, weapons drawn. A coup within a coup. You think you've won, Blackwell said, his voice magically amplified again. You think exposing my finances matters? I control half the guards in this territory. I have allies in 3 neighboring territories who depend on the funds I've diverted to them. You've just declared war on a network far larger than yourself. He gestured, and the guards closed in on Elara and Dominic. This trial is over. The girl will be executed for treason. Alpha Stone will be imprisoned for aiding her, and the council will select a proper Luna who understands how things actually work. Dominic shifted into combat stance immediately, positioning himself between Elara and the approaching guards. Victor had somehow made it down to the arena floor, moving to join them. But there were 20 guards with weapons drawn against 3 fighters, one of whom was still recovering from 2 brutal combat matches. Elara felt the power inside her surging again, responding to the threat. Her Luna form wanted to manifest fully, to become that 8-foot-tall celestial warrior she'd glimpsed in her mother's genetic memories. But she wasn't ready, didn't know how to control it. Releasing that much power without understanding it could kill everyone in the arena, friend and foe alike. She needed a different solution. Elara looked at the guards closing in, at Blackwell standing confident in his control, at the crowd watching in horrified fascination, at Dominic ready to fight impossible odds to protect her. And she remembered what Victor had taught her about asymmetric warfare. You can't outfight them, he'd said. Outthink them. Elara raised her glowing hands, not in attack but in a gesture for attention. Guards! She called out, her voice carrying clearly. "Do you know what's in the offshore account under transaction code 7749? Several guards hesitated, confusion crossing their faces. "Elder Blackwell has been paying you below standard rates for 23 years, Alara continued. "Your salaries should be 40% higher based on territory wealth. The difference has been deposited into private accounts he controls." "That's a lie," Blackwell shouted. "Don't listen to her." "The passcode is your badge numbers in reverse," Alara said, ignoring him. "Check it yourselves. See what you're owed, see what he's stolen from you while telling you the territory couldn't afford proper pay." "How do you know this?" one guard asked, lowering his weapon slightly. "My mother died investigating financial corruption. Before she died, she encoded everything. Bank accounts, transaction histories, passwords. She wanted someone to finish what she started." Alara pulled out one more document. "Here's the full list. Every guard in Silvercrest territory, and what you're actually owed versus what you've been paid." She threw the pages into the air. They scattered across the arena floor. Guards broke formation to grab them, their loyalty to Blackwell suddenly less certain than their need to know if they'd been cheated. "This is manipulation," Blackwell snarled. "She's trying to divide us." "You already divided us," one of the guards said, reading his page. "According to this, you owe me $60,000 in back pay." Another guard checked his document. $75,000 here. More guards were reading now, weapons lowering as they processed the information. The realization that they'd been fighting for someone who'd been stealing from them was spreading like fire through their ranks. Blackwell's face had gone purple with rage. "Seize her now! That's an order!" But only 5 guards moved to obey. The rest stood frozen, uncertain, unwilling to fight for a leader who'd been robbing them blind. It was enough of an opening. Dominic moved first, his alpha command rolling out. "Stand down. All guards stand down. That's an alpha order." The 5 who'd been advancing hesitated, caught between competing authorities. Victor used that moment to disarm the nearest guard, a smooth, practiced move that left the man weaponless and off balance. "You really want to die protecting his bank accounts?" Victor asked conversationally. The guard stepped back, hands raised. "No, sir." The rest of Blackwell's loyalists looked at each other, then at their surrounded elder, then at the crowd of angry citizens who were now calling for Blackwell's head. The math wasn't in their favor. Weapons lowered one by one. Blackwell stood alone on the arena floor. His coup collapsed, his finances exposed, his power evaporated. For a long moment he just stared at Alara with an expression of pure hatred. "You've destroyed everything," he said quietly. "You think you've saved the territory? You've just painted a target on Silvercrest that every enemy will see. A foundling Luna with no training, no experience, no political connections. We'll be invaded within a year." "Maybe," Alara said, walking closer to him. "Or maybe having a Luna who actually cares about her people instead of robbing them will make us stronger than we've been in decades." She stopped just outside his reach. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, murder, conspiracy, and attempted coup. You'll face a public trial with real evidence and real justice, not the show trial you arranged for me." "Kill me and make me a martyr," Blackwell said. "My allies won't forget this." "I'm not going to kill you," Alara said. "That's the difference between us. You murder people who threaten your power. I'm going to lock you up and let everyone watch as we rebuild what you destroyed." Dominic moved to Blackwell's side, producing iron chains marked with silver, the kind used for prisoners who might try to shift and escape. "Matthias Blackwell, you are hereby stripped of your counsel position and placed under arrest pending trial." As guards who were no longer loyal to Blackwell took him into custody, Alara turned to face the crowd. The arena had been silent during the confrontation, but now erupted into chaos again. Some people were cheering, others looked shocked. Many seemed uncertain what this meant for the territory's future. Counselor Vance rose from the council box, her face pale but determined. "The trial of Luna Alara is concluded. She has demonstrated not only strategic thinking, but the courage to expose corruption that threatened our entire territory." She looked at the other council members who were still present, measuring their reactions. "I move that we recognize Alara Ashwin as our rightful Luna, chosen by the throne and proven through trial." Several council members nodded immediately. Others hesitated, calculating political futures, weighing options. Finally, the eldest among them, Councillor Helena Vance's aunt, stood. "I second the motion, and I propose we begin immediate financial audits of all council holdings. If we're going to rebuild trust, we need transparency." The vote was called. Not unanimous, but enough. More than enough. Alara stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by evidence of Blackwell's crimes and guards who'd chosen truth over blind loyalty, and felt the weight of what she'd just done settling onto her shoulders. She hadn't just won her trials. She'd exposed a conspiracy that went back 23 years. She'd turned Blackwell's own guards against him. She'd claimed Luna status not through combat prowess or magical power, but through the one thing she'd learned better than anyone: how to read people, how to find leverage, how to survive when you had no power by understanding exactly where the real power was hidden. Dominic moved to her side, his hand finding hers. "You did it," he said quietly. "You actually did it." "We did it," Alara corrected. "I couldn't have survived without you." "The formal recognition ceremony can wait," Counselor Vance announced. "But I think we can all agree the throne's judgment has been validated." She gestured to where Blackwell was being led away in chains. "We have a great deal of work ahead of us." She looked at Alara, starting with explaining to the territory exactly what happened here today. Alara nodded, exhaustion suddenly catching up with her. The adrenaline that had carried her through combat and political confrontation was fading, leaving her aware of every bruise, every strained muscle, every moment of terror she'd pushed through. But she was alive. She'd survived. And more than that, she'd won. The arena began to clear slowly, people still processing what they'd witnessed. This was supposed to have been a straightforward trial. Instead, they'd watch their government exposed as corrupt, their Luna revealed as someone who'd spent 23 years invisible while gathering intelligence they'd never suspected, their entire understanding of power turned upside down. Victor appeared beside them, carrying water and medical supplies. "You're going to feel this tomorrow," he said to Alara, already checking her injuries. "That temple hit was nasty, probably concussed." "I'll survive," Alara said, accepting the water gratefully. "More than survive," Victor corrected. "You just revolutionized how we think about Luna trials. No noble candidate would have thought to attack the scenario's premise instead of answering it." "Because I've never been taught there's only one right way to do things," Alara said. "When you're a servant, you learn there are always ways around problems. You just have to look for them. Well, your servant skills just saved the territory from decades more corruption." Victor's respect was evident in his tone, and probably prevented a war. If Blackwell had continued weakening our defenses while enemies circled, a war might still be coming, Dominic said quietly. Blackwell mentioned allies in other territories, people who've been receiving diverted funds. When those payments stop, they'll have reason to be angry. "Then we prepare," Alara said, "but we do it with full war funds instead of whatever scraps Blackwell left us, and with people who actually trust their leadership." She looked at the arena, at the blood-stained dirt where she'd fought and nearly died, at the table still covered in evidence of crimes that had cost her mother's life. "We have a lot of work ahead," she agreed with Vance, "but at least now we're building on truth instead of lies." As they left the arena, Alara caught sight of someone in the crowd, a young woman, maybe 16, wearing the simple clothes of the working class. She was crying, but not with sadness, with something that looked like hope. The girl met Alara's eyes and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Alara nodded acknowledgement, understanding what it meant. That girl had just watched someone like her, someone without power or privilege or proper bloodline, stand up to the most powerful people in the territory and win. Had watched the invisible become visible, had watched the broken prove she was never broken at all, just different. That was worth more than any formal recognition ceremony. They emerged from the arena into afternoon sunlight. The palace staff was already spreading word of what had happened. The servant who became Luna, the elder who fell from grace, the corruption exposed, the trials that became a revolution. Tomorrow they would begin the real work, financial audits, political restructuring, preparing for whatever retaliation Blackwell's allies might attempt, building a new government based on transparency instead of hidden theft. But today, Alara had survived. She'd claimed her place not through birthright or magical power, but through 23 years of learning to see what others overlooked, through understanding that real strength wasn't about fighting power directly, but about finding its weak points and applying pressure until it collapsed. Dominic's hand squeezed hers as they walked. "You're smiling," he observed. "I'm just thinking about all those nobles who spent their lives training for strategic trials." Alara's smile widened, and a servant beat them by refusing to play their game, by asking the question they never thought anyone would dare ask. "Where did the money go?" Dominic quoted. "Exactly, because that's what servants learn. Follow the resources. Understand who controls what. Know where the real power flows under the surface of official structures. She looked up at him. You said yesterday that maybe the throne chose me for what I already am instead of what I might become. I think you were right. I'm always right, Dominic said with mock seriousness. It's very inconvenient for everyone around me. Alara laughed, surprised the sound could still come out after everything. They reached the palace entrance where more guards waited. These ones offered respectful salutes as Alara passed, recognition of her new status even without formal ceremony. Inside, Priestess Morgana waited in the shadows near a pillar. She looked pleased in her ancient, mysterious way. You used what I gave you well, the priestess said. The potion unlocked your seal. The genetic memories provided evidence. But the strategy, that was all you. My mother's strategy, Alara corrected. She encoded all of this before she died. I just finished what she started. Your mother would be proud. Morgana's clouded eyes somehow conveyed warmth. As am I. She began to fade into shadows again, but paused. One more thing. Captain Lyra Quinn of the Northern Wildlands Survivors has been waiting to meet you. I suggest you make time for that conversation soon. Your bloodline has more allies than you know. Then she was gone. Alara looked at Dominic. More revelations? Apparently our work isn't done, he agreed, but that can wait until tomorrow. Right now you need medical attention, food, and sleep, in that order. And you? Alara said, studying his face. You've been taking care of me all day. Who takes care of you? Something shifted in Dominic's expression, vulnerability breaking through his alpha control. Nobody, usually. I'm supposed to be strong enough to not need it. That's not how partnerships work, Alara said firmly. We take care of each other. That was the deal. She pulled him towards the Luna chambers. Come on, Victor can check both of us. Then we eat, rest, and figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. They walked through the palace together, past tapestries that depicted great Lunas of the past, past ceremonial armor worn in battles long finished, past portraits of leaders who'd shaped Silvercrest's history. Alara would join them now in the records. The foundling Luna who exposed corruption and claimed power through intelligence instead of force. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Blackwell's trial, political restructuring, preparing for potential retaliation from his allies in other territories, learning to fully access and control her Luna powers, building trust with a population that had watched their government collapse in a single afternoon. But tonight, she had this. Dominic's hand in hers. The certainty that she'd survived trials designed to kill her. The knowledge that her mother's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The beginning of something that might actually be better than what came before. The throne hadn't made a mistake. It had seen exactly what Silvercrest needed. Not another noble daughter who'd maintain the status quo, but someone who'd learned to survive in the shadows and could use that knowledge to drag hidden corruption into the light. Someone who understood that real power wasn't about being stronger. It was about being smarter, more observant, more willing to ask the questions everyone else was afraid to voice. Someone who'd been invisible for so long that she'd learned to see what the visible missed. The Luna who rose from nothing, the servant who became a strategist, the broken girl who proved she was never broken at all. Alara Ashwin claimed her throne not through combat or magic, but through 23 years of learning to survive impossible odds. And now she would use those same skills to rebuild a territory that had forgotten what real leadership looked like. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, she would rest, heal, and let herself believe that maybe, possibly, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The throne had known. Her mother had known. And finally, Alara was beginning to know it too. 2 weeks after the trials, Matthias Blackwell stood before a jury of commoners in the rebuilt throne room. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A council elder who'd spent decades ruling over common wolves was now being judged by them. The trial had been Alara's first major decision as recognized Luna. Public, transparent, with evidence presented to citizens who'd never been allowed to question their leaders before. It was revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. Alara sat on the glowing Luna throne, Dominic standing beside her in his formal alpha regalia. The throne room had been modified according to her specifications. More windows letting in natural light. Seating arranged so common citizens had equal access to noble families. The oppressive darkness that had characterized Blackwell's era was gone. The evidence was presented methodically. Financial records showing 23 years of embezzlement, testimony from Captain Lyra Quinn about the Great Purge and how it had been orchestrated to silence Luna Serafina's investigation. Documents proving Blackwell had hired the assassins who'd killed over 200 wolves across 5 territories. Blackwell's defense was simple and chilling. I did what was necessary to maintain order. Luna Serafina would have destabilized multiple territories by exposing the financial arrangements that kept our coalition stable. Sometimes leaders must make terrible choices for the greater good. You mean for your greater wealth, the jury foreman said, a former miner who'd lost his brother in an underfunded military operation. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, treason against the Luna bloodline, attempted coup. The sentence was Alara's to decide. She stood from her throne and descended to face Blackwell directly. The man who'd killed her mother, who'd stolen from his own people, who'd tried to have Alara executed to hide his crimes. The easy choice would be execution. The crowd wanted it. The noble families expected it. Even Dominic had quietly suggested it would eliminate future threats. But Alara had learned something about power during her 23 years of invisibility. Real strength wasn't about crushing your enemies. It was about proving you were better than they were. Exile to the penal colony, she announced. Life sentence. No possibility of parole. You'll spend the rest of your days watching from a distance as we rebuild everything you corrupted. The crowd murmured, some disappointed, others thoughtfully quiet. Blackwell's face twisted with rage. You think mercy makes you strong? It makes you weak. My allies won't forget this. They'll come for you, and when they do, you'll wish you'd had the spine to kill me when you had the chance. Alara met his eyes without flinching. Maybe. But I won't become the monster you tried to create. That's the difference between us. As guards led Blackwell away, he called back one final warning. The Preservation Council meets in 3 days. 5 territories who depend on the funds I provided them. They're already mobilizing against you. This mercy of yours just signed Silvercrest's death warrant. The throne room fell silent. Everyone had heard the threat. Everyone understood what it meant. War was coming. After the trial, Alara convened an emergency war council in the strategy room. The space was designed for exactly this purpose, with maps covering every wall and a central table large enough for a dozen people to stand around comfortably. Present were Dominic, Commander Victor Cross, Captain Lyra Quinn, who'd arrived with her 17 Northern Wildlands survivors, Counselor Helena Vance representing the Reformed Council, and 3 of Dominic's most trusted military advisors. Intelligence reports confirm Blackwell's warning, one advisor said, spreading reconnaissance photos across the table. 5 territories mobilizing: Eastern Coalition, Northern Ridge, West March, Southlands, and Coastal Guard. Total estimated force of 12,000 troops. Silvercrest has 4,000, Victor said grimly. Even with Western Territories Alliance, we're looking at 2-to-1 odds minimum. Alara studied the maps, her enhanced senses picking up details she would have missed before Morgana's potion had unlocked her seal. Supply routes, terrain advantages, population centers that would need defending. We can't win a direct confrontation, she said quietly. Not with those numbers. Then we don't fight them directly, Lyra said. The Northern Wildlands survived 23 years of persecution through guerrilla tactics. We make invasion costly. We make them question whether territory is worth the price. Alara looked at the older woman. Lyra was in her 50s, weathered and scarred from decades of survival. Her 17 warriors represented the last survivors of Alara's mother's territory. They'd been living in hiding, waiting for this exact moment. Tell me about your tactics, Alara said. For the next 2 hours, Lyra outlined strategies that had kept her people alive when superior forces hunted them. Supply line sabotage, nighttime raids, psychological warfare, using terrain and local knowledge against enemies who fought by conventional rules. Victor listened with growing respect. This is Special Forces doctrine. Where did you learn it? Your Luna Serafina taught me, Lyra said, before she was murdered for discovering Blackwell's crimes. She believed the old way of fighting, massive army against massive army, was obsolete. She said the future belonged to small teams using intelligence and precision over brute force. My mother was a military strategist? Alara felt something crack open in her chest, another piece of the woman she'd never known, among other things. Lyra pulled out a worn notebook. She kept detailed tactical journals. I've been carrying them for 23 years, waiting to give them to you. She slid the notebook across the table. Alara opened it carefully, seeing her mother's handwriting for the first time. Precise notes about asymmetric warfare, observations about how smaller forces could neutralize larger ones through strategic thinking rather than direct confrontation. It read like a military manual written by someone who understood that wars were won in planning rooms before they ever reached battlefields. "We use this," Elara said, tapping the notebook. "We take their conventional war and turn it into something they're not prepared for." Dominic leaned over the maps. "What are you thinking?" "We're outnumbered," Elara said, her mind racing through possibilities the way she'd once navigated complex servant hierarchies to avoid notice. "So we make numbers irrelevant. We don't hold territory, we make them chase us. We don't meet them in open battle, we hit their supply lines until they can't sustain the invasion. We don't fight their strengths, we exploit their weaknesses." She looked at Victor. "You said you've been investigating suspicious financial transactions for months. Tell me about the Preservation Council's funding structure." Victor pulled out his own files. Blackwell was sending them approximately $5 million annually each. Coastal Guard used it to maintain their fleet. Eastern Coalition funded their cavalry divisions. Without that money, they're all running deficits. "Then we don't just defend," Elara said. "We attack their finances. We offer amnesty and full evidence disclosure to any territory that withdraws. We show their citizens exactly where their leaders' extra funding was coming from and what crimes were committed to generate it." "Political warfare," Helena Vance said slowly. "Turn their own populations against them." "Combined with military pressure," Dominic added, following her logic. "We make invasion expensive in blood and treasure while simultaneously showing their people that their leaders are complicit in massive corruption." The room fell silent as everyone processed the strategy. It was unprecedented, ambitious, possibly suicidal. It was also their only real chance. Victor spoke first. "This requires perfect coordination, intelligence gathering, surgical strikes, political messaging, all synchronized. One mistake and we're exposed." "Then we don't make mistakes," Elara said simply. "We have 3 days before they mobilize fully. That's our window." She turned to Lyra. "I need your 17 warriors split into strike teams. Primary targets are supply depots and communication hubs. Nothing that causes civilian casualties, but everything that slows their advance." Lyra nodded. "We've been waiting 23 years for this. My people are ready." "Victor," Elara continued, "I need detailed intelligence on every Preservation Council member's financial situation. Which ones are most vulnerable to exposure? Which populations are most likely to rebel against leaders caught in corruption?" "Already working on it," Victor said. "I'll have preliminary reports by tomorrow." "Helena," Elara turned to the counselor, "draft amnesty offers. Any territory that withdraws before the first shot is fired gets full pardons and access to our evidence against Blackwell. Make it clear we're not interested in punishment, just justice." Helena pulled out a notebook. "What about territories that refuse?" "Then we make them examples," Dominic said quietly. "Captured officers get treated well and sent home with documentation of what they're really fighting for. We win their soldiers' hearts before we ever face them in battle." Elara felt something settle in her chest. Not confidence exactly, but certainty. This was what the throne had recognized in her. Not magical power or combat prowess, but this. The ability to see complex systems and find the pressure points that would make them collapse. She'd spent 23 years surviving by understanding power structures from the bottom up. Now she would use that knowledge to dismantle an entire coalition. 3 days, she said. We prepare for war, but we hope for surrender. And we show 5 territories that the servant girl they underestimated learned more in the shadows than they ever taught their nobles in strategy classes. The first operation launched 36 hours later. Operation Financial Disclosure targeted Eastern Coalition specifically. Intelligence suggested their alpha, Marcus Brennan, had been diverting Blackwell's payments into a private account while his military suffered from underfunding. His soldiers fought with inadequate equipment while he purchased estates and luxury goods. Lyra's team, 8 wolves moving through darkness, infiltrated Eastern Coalition's main communication hub. They didn't attack it. They uploaded evidence directly into the military network where every soldier could access it. Financial records showing exactly where their funding had gone. Blackwell's ledgers proving the corruption. Photos of Brennan's properties purchased with money meant for their supplies. By dawn, Eastern Coalition's military was in chaos. Soldiers were refusing orders. Officers were demanding answers. The civilian population was calling for Brennan's resignation. Brennan tried to suppress the information, but it had already spread too far. Within 48 hours, he was facing a military tribunal convened by his own officers. They withdrew from the Preservation Council and requested Silvercrest's amnesty offer. 1 territory down, 4 to go. Operation Supply Denial hit Northern Ridge simultaneously. Victor's intelligence had identified their primary ammunition depot located near the southern border. The entire invasion force depended on supplies stored there. Lyra led this mission personally. 6 wolves, moving like ghosts through terrain they'd mapped for months. They bypassed patrols, avoided detection systems, reached the depot at midnight. The explosion was carefully controlled, large enough to destroy the ammunition, but small enough to avoid civilian casualties in the nearby village. The blast lit up the night sky, visible for miles. Northern Ridge's invasion force ground to a halt. Without ammunition, they couldn't sustain combat operations. Their alpha called for ceasefire negotiations within days. 2 territories neutralized, 3 remaining. But Operation Political Fracture, aimed at Westmarch, went wrong. The plan had been elegant. Infiltrate their capital, deliver evidence of their alpha's corruption directly to key political figures, spark internal reform that would force withdrawal from the Preservation Council. Instead, Westmarch's alpha had been expecting them. Intelligence suggested he'd been warned, possibly by someone inside Silvercrest who still had loyalties to the old order. Lyra's team of 4 wolves walked into an ambush. 2 were killed immediately, cut down by crossfire before they could retreat. One was Sergeant Kira, a wolf who'd survived the Great Purge as a child. The other was Lieutenant Marcus, Lyra's second-in-command for 15 years. The other 2, including Lyra herself, barely escaped with severe injuries and the evidence undelivered. Alara received the news in the strategy room at 3 a.m. Casualties, failure. Named wolves who'd trusted her leadership now dead. She wanted to scream, to rage, to grieve for the wolves she'd sent into danger. But leaders didn't have that luxury during active operations. Instead, she looked at the maps and asked the only question that mattered. Can we salvage this? Victor was already adjusting plans. Westmarch is now hostile and prepared. They've reinforced their positions, increased patrols. Traditional infiltration won't work anymore. Then we go unconventional, Dominic said. We don't sneak past their defenses. We challenge their alpha directly. All eyes turned to him. He was studying the maps with an expression Alara had learned to recognize, the look of someone forming a dangerous plan. Alpha challenge by combat, Dominic continued. Their leader versus ours. Winner takes strategic control. It's old law but still binding. That's suicide, Helena protested. Their alpha is Cassius Vale, former Preservation Council military commander. He's killed 12 challengers over his career. Exactly, Dominic said, which means he's arrogant, overconfident. He won't see us as a real threat. Alara understood where he was going. You want to use his pride against him. I want to use everything against him, Dominic corrected. We challenge publicly. Make it impossible for him to refuse without looking weak. Then we don't just beat him in combat. We expose his corruption during the fight. Make it a trial as much as a duel. How do you expose corruption during combat? Victor asked skeptically. The same way Alara turned her strategy trial into a financial audit, Dominic said. We broadcast everything. Show his population exactly what he's been doing with Blackwell's money while they suffered. Make him defend his actions while defending his life. It was insane. Risky. Exactly the kind of asymmetric thinking that had kept Alara alive for 23 years. I'll fight him, Alara said quietly. The room erupted in protests. Absolutely not. You're Luna, not a combat specialist. Cassius will kill you in minutes. This is madness. Alara raised her hand for silence. Listen, if Dominic fights, it looks like traditional alpha dominance, male power versus male power. Nobody learns anything. But if I fight, the servant Luna against the military commander, it becomes something else entirely. She stood from her chair, moving to the map of Westmarch territory. It becomes a statement about who deserves power, about what real strength looks like, about whether bloodline and military might matter more than justice and intelligence. And when I win, she looked around the room, meeting each skeptical gaze, it breaks their coalition completely. Because if a foundling Luna can defeat their greatest warrior, what does that say about everything they believe? Victor spoke first. You've had 2 weeks of combat training. Cassius has 40 years. Then we make 40 years of experience irrelevant, Alara said. The same way we've made everything else irrelevant. We change the rules of the fight itself. She spent the next 3 days preparing. Victor taught her everything he could cram into 72 hours. Not about matching Cassius's skill, that was impossible, but about exploiting his expectations, reading his movements, using his aggression against him, fighting smart instead of strong. Lyra contributed tactics from Alara's mother's journals, despite her injuries. Serafina had faced superior combatants before and survived through psychological warfare, making opponents angry, forcing mistakes, turning their strengths into weaknesses. Dominic worked with Alara on her partially unlocked Luna powers. She couldn't fully transform yet, but she could access enhanced speed, strength, and that protective shield that had saved her during the trials. They practiced until she could maintain it even while moving, even while being struck. On the morning of the challenge, Alara stood before a mirror in the Luna chambers. She wore combat leathers designed by Lyra, flexible and protective without restricting movement. Her hair was pulled back severely, no jewelry, no decoration, nothing that could be grabbed or used against her. The mark of the moon blessed on her chest pulsed steady and warm. Her mother's power, waiting to be fully unlocked. Her mother's intelligence, already proven effective. Her mother's sacrifice, finally being honored. Dominic entered without knocking, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Thought you might need this." Alara accepted gratefully. "Are you going to tell me this is a terrible idea?" "I think it's brilliant and terrifying," he said, "just like you." "If I lose," she started, but he cut her off. "You won't lose, not because you're stronger or better trained, but because you see things he doesn't. You always have." He set down his tea and took her hands. "Whatever happens today, know that you've already changed everything. Blackwell's gone, corruption's exposed. 2 territories have withdrawn from the Preservation Council. Even if this goes wrong, you've accomplished more in 3 weeks than most Lunas do in lifetimes." "That's not very encouraging about my survival odds," Alara pointed out. Dominic smiled. "You want encouragement? Fine. You're the woman who turned a strategy trial into a political coup, who exposed embezzlement during a combat demonstration, who built an entire war strategy around the tactical knowledge you gained from carrying serving trays. Cassius doesn't stand a chance because he thinks this is about fighting. You know it's about winning." Alara kissed him then, fierce and certain and full of everything she couldn't put into words. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "If something happens to me," she whispered, "finish what we started. Don't let them go back to the old ways." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Dominic said firmly, "because I'll be watching. And if Cassius tries anything dishonorable, I'll intervene whether it's legal or not." The challenge was held at the border between Silvercrest and West March territories. Neutral ground, witnessed by representatives from all 5 Preservation Council territories and a crowd of thousands who'd traveled to watch. Cassius Vale was everything Alara expected. Massive, scarred from decades of combat, moving with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight. He wore traditional combat armor, carried weapons that looked like they'd ended many lives. Alara wore her leather and carried nothing. The rules were simple and brutal. Fight until one combatant yielded, was incapacitated, or died. No outside interference, no time limits. Winner's territory gained strategic control over the losers. Before the fight began, Alara requested something unprecedented. She wanted screens set up, visible to the entire crowd, broadcasting information during the combat. Cassius laughed when he heard. "Fine. Show them whatever you want. Won't matter when you're bleeding out in the dirt." The fight began at noon under cloudless sky. Cassius attacked immediately, confident and overwhelming. His first strike would have taken Alara's head off if she hadn't been watching for it. She ducked, rolled, came up 5 feet away. He pursued relentlessly. Alara kept moving, staying ahead of his attacks by fractions of seconds. The crowd was shouting, but she tuned them out, focused only on reading Cassius, his patterns, his tells, the slight tensing of muscles before each strike. She was faster than him thanks to her partially unlocked Luna abilities, but he was stronger, more experienced, better trained. Every blocked hit sent shockwaves through her arms. Every near miss reminded her how close death was. After 2 minutes of pursuit, Cassius paused, breathing hard. "Stand and fight like a warrior instead of running like prey." "I'm fighting exactly like a warrior should," Alara called back, "using my advantages instead of playing to your strengths." The screens flickered to life behind her. "Victor's doing." They began displaying information. Financial records showing Cassius's corruption. evidence of how he'd diverted Blackwell's payments while his soldiers suffered. The crowd noise changed. People were reading the screens, seeing the evidence. Cassius's face reddened with rage. "This is supposed to be honorable combat." "Like the honor you showed your soldiers when you stole their equipment funds?" Alara countered. "Like the honor Blackwell showed my mother when he murdered her for discovering these crimes?" She activated her shield as Cassius charged, furious now instead of controlled. His strikes came faster, but less precise, anger making him sloppy. Alara waited for her opening, found it when he overextended on a particularly savage blow. She dropped her shield and drove her glowing fist into his exposed ribs. Not full Luna power, but enough to crack bone. Cassius stumbled. She pressed the advantage, moving inside his reach where his size and weapons were disadvantages. Another strike to his injured ribs, a sweep to his knee, using momentum and precision against his brute force. He caught her with a backhand that sent her flying. She hit the ground hard, tasting blood. Her shield snapped up automatically as he moved in for the killing blow. His weapon struck the barrier and deflected. The screens were showing more information now. Testimony from his soldiers, families of wolves who'd died in underfunded operations, citizens of Westmarch describing how they'd suffered while their alpha lived in luxury. The crowd was turning. Alara could hear it in their shouts, the tide of opinion shifting from entertaining combat to righteous anger at their leaders' exposed crimes. Cassius heard it too. Felt his support collapsing in real time. It made him desperate. He abandoned technique entirely, just raw, savage attacks meant to overwhelm her defenses through sheer power. Alara gave ground, letting him chase her around the combat circle, letting him exhaust himself while she conserved energy. Victor had taught her this. When facing a stronger opponent, make them work. Make them waste strength on attacks that don't land. Wait for the moment when exhaustion makes them vulnerable. That moment came 10 minutes into the fight. Cassius's strikes were slowing, his breathing ragged, sweat pouring down his face. Alara saw her chance. She dropped her shield and moved with every bit of enhanced speed her Luna abilities provided, got inside his guard, drove her glowing fist into his already injured ribs with everything she had. Cassius went down to one knee, gasping in pain. Alara stood over him, breathing hard, her hand glowing with power that could finish him right now. The crowd had gone silent, waiting to see if she'd kill or show mercy. "Yield," she said quietly. "Acknowledge your crimes, order your territory to withdraw from the Preservation Council, and I'll let you live." Cassius looked up at her with hatred burning in his eyes, but he also looked at the screens showing his corruption, at the crowd of his own people calling for his removal, at the certain death glowing in her hand if he refused. "I yield," he spat. "Westmarch withdraws." The crowd erupted. Not cheering exactly, but something more complex. Recognition, understanding, the realization that they'd just watched their entire worldview shift. Alara helped Cassius to his feet, her gesture visible to everyone present. Even in victory, she showed respect. Even after he'd tried to kill her, she offered mercy and dignity. It was a calculated political move, but it was also genuine. She'd learned from Blackwell's mistakes. Cruelty created resentment. Mercy, offered from strength, created something more valuable. Respect, maybe even gratitude. The challenge was over. Westmarch territory was under Silvercrest's strategic control. 3 of 5 Preservation Council territories had withdrawn or been neutralized. 2 remained, Southlands and Coastal Guard. They sued for peace the next day, realizing they couldn't sustain coalition against an opponent who'd dismantled half their alliance in just over a week of operations. The war was over in 10 days. Won not through superior military force, but through intelligence, strategy, and the willingness to fight by rules their enemies didn't understand. In the final accounting, the brief conflict cost lives. 4 wolves died in the initial intelligence operations before the main strikes began. 2 more were killed in Lyra's ambushed Westmarch mission, Sergeant Kira and Lieutenant Marcus. 3 territorial guards were killed defending their posts during Operation Supply Denial, caught in the explosion's unexpected spread. One of Dominic's advisors, Captain Elena, died from injuries sustained in a skirmish at the contested border where Southlands had attempted a probe before surrendering. 10 casualties total, each one a wolf with a name, a family, a life cut short by conflict. It was far fewer than traditional warfare would have cost, but it was still 10 too many. 1 year after accidentally sitting on the sacred Luna throne, Alara stood in the rebuilt Northern Wildlands throne room. The space had been carefully restored using Lyra's memories of what it looked like before the Great Purge. The throne itself was carved from ancient wood that had survived the territory's destruction, infused with moon magic by Priestess Morgana. It represented rebirth rather than unbroken tradition. Today was the formal recognition ceremony. Representatives from 7 territories were present: Silvercrest and the 6 former Preservation Council members who joined what was now being called the Luna Coalition, an alliance based on transparency, mutual defense, and shared commitment to actual justice rather than corrupt power structures. The ceremony was simple: no parade of noble candidates, no tests designed to eliminate the unworthy, just recognition of what already existed. Alara wore formal Luna regalia, silver and blue fabric that caught light like the throne's glow. Dominic stood beside her in his alpha attire. They'd been formally mated 6 months ago in a ceremony that broke tradition by including common citizens as witnesses instead of just nobility. Priestess Morgana conducted the ritual, her ancient voice carrying clearly. The Northern Wildlands throne recognizes Alara Ashwin, daughter of Luna Seraphina, as its chosen Luna. Let all territories witness and acknowledge. Alara lowered herself onto the wooden throne. It glowed immediately, silver gold light spreading across its surface, different from Silvercrest's throne, but unmistakably genuine recognition. A second throne accepting her felt like validation, rather than surprise now, proof that what she'd built in one territory could extend to others. For the first time in recorded history, one Luna held 2 territories. The symbolic reunification of bloodlines scattered by Blackwell's crimes. The representatives from the 7 territories rose as one, formal acknowledgement of her status. Even the former Preservation Council members who'd fought against her now recognized her authority, because she'd proven something they couldn't deny. That power without accountability was corruption. That real strength came from serving people rather than dominating them. That someone who'd spent 23 years invisible had learned more about leadership than they'd taught their nobles in lifetimes. After the ceremony, Alara walked through the rebuilt Northern Wildlands capital with Dominic. The territory was slowly repopulating, survivors returning from hiding, new families moving in attracted by the promise of fresh starts and fair governance. They passed the construction site where a public school was being built, the first of many across all coalition territories, education available to everyone regardless of bloodline or wealth. A young girl ran up to them, maybe 10 years old, wearing simple work clothes. "Luna Alara," she said breathlessly. "Is it true you couldn't shift when you were young?" Alara knelt to the girl's level. "True. Still can't shift normally. My transformation works differently." The girl's eyes went wide. "But you're Luna. You're the strongest person in all the territories." "Strength isn't just about shifting," Alara said gently. "It's about using whatever abilities you have as effectively as possible. About being smart, observant, kind, even when the world isn't kind to you. What's your name?" "Mira." The girl fidgeted with her sleeve. "I can't shift either. Everyone says I'm broken." Alara felt her chest tighten. She reached out and took Mira's hand. "You're not broken. You're just becoming something the world hasn't seen before, like me. And you know what?" "What?" "By the time you're grown, there will be schools teaching different kinds of strength. Medical research into alternative transformations. A whole society that understands being different isn't the same as being less, because we're building that world right now." Mira smiled, genuine and bright. "Can I really go to the new school?" "Absolutely." Alara squeezed her hand. "In fact, I want you to write to me after your first month. Tell me what you're learning. Tell me if the teachers are doing their jobs right. Because you're the future we're building this for." After Mira ran off, Dominic pulled Alara close. "You're good at this, the inspiring next generation thing." "I'm just telling her what I wish someone had told me," Alara said. "That being invisible doesn't mean being worthless. That surviving impossible odds is its own kind of strength." They continued walking, passing memorial gardens dedicated to casualties from the 10-day conflict. 10 wolves had died in operations. Each one was honored with a planted tree, their names carved into stone markers. Sergeant Kira, Lieutenant Marcus, Captain Elena, 7 others whose families visited daily to remember. Alara visited regularly, read the names, remembered that leadership meant carrying the weight of those who'd died following your orders. It was the hardest part of being Luna, harder than combat or political maneuvering or exposing corruption. Knowing that your decisions cost lives even when they were the right decisions. In the late afternoon, they returned to Silvercrest for the final piece of business. Matthias Blackwell's last message had arrived from the penal colony where he'd been serving his life sentence. He'd died 3 days ago. Heart attack according to the medical report. Not murder, just age and stress finally catching up with him. He'd left a letter. Helena Vance had received it that morning and brought it to Alara immediately. Alara opened it in the privacy of her chambers with Dominic reading over her shoulder. Luna Alara, it began in Blackwell's precise handwriting. I write this knowing I will not survive to see your response. The doctors tell me my heart is failing, a perhaps fitting end for someone accused of having none. I have spent this year in exile watching your reforms from a distance, the financial transparency, the public education initiatives, the coalition you've built based on shared values rather than fear and manipulation. I have watched you succeed where I was certain you would fail. I was wrong. Not about everything. I still believe strong leadership requires making hard choices that look cruel in the moment. I still believe the threat of Luna power destabilizing existing power structures was real. But I was wrong about you. Wrong to think that exposing my corruption would destroy the territory. Wrong to believe that a foundling with no training couldn't lead effectively. Wrong to choose theft and murder over trusting my people with truth. Your mother, Luna Serafina, tried to tell me this 23 years ago. She believed transparency was strength rather than weakness. She believed people could handle difficult truths if given the chance. I killed her because I was afraid she was wrong. She wasn't. You've proven that. I cannot ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. 237 wolves died because of my choices. Your mother among them. No apology changes that. But I can acknowledge the truth. You are the Luna Silvercrest needed. Not because you were chosen by the throne, though that matters, but because you remember what it's like to be powerless. You'll never forget that leadership exists to serve rather than dominate. My death closes a chapter of our territory's history. What you build from here is yours. Don't let my mistakes define you. Don't let hatred of me prevent you from making hard choices when necessary. Lead well. Lead justly. Lead with the intelligence your mother possessed and the mercy I never learned. Matthias Blackwell, former elder of Silvercrest territory. Alara read it twice, then handed it to Dominic. He scanned it silently. He doesn't ask for forgiveness, Dominic noted. No, Alara said. That's the only reason I can respect the letter at all. He acknowledges what he did without trying to excuse it or minimize it. Just acceptance that he was wrong and I was right. Will you make this public? Dominic asked. Alara considered. Parts of it. The acknowledgement that transparency works. The validation that my approach was correct. But not the personal elements about my mother. Those are private. She moved to the window overlooking Silvercrest Capital. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold and orange. Below, people moved through streets that were safer, cleaner, more prosperous than they'd been under Blackwell's corrupt regime. I don't forgive him, she said quietly, but I understand him. He was afraid of change, afraid of losing control, afraid that admitting mistakes would destroy everything. Those fears killed hundreds of people, including my mother. Understanding them doesn't excuse them, but it helps me avoid making the same mistakes. Dominic joined her at the window. You're pregnant. Alara's hand went automatically to her stomach. 3 months. She hadn't told anyone yet, waiting until she was certain. How did you know? Your scent changed 2 weeks ago. Alpha senses. He pulled her close, his hand covering hers over their child. Are you worried? Terrified, Alara admitted. What if the baby can't shift? What if they inherit my blocked transformation? What if I've built this whole society around accepting difference, but my own child still feels broken? Then we teach them the same thing you're teaching Mira and every other wolf who doesn't fit traditional molds, Dominic said. That different isn't less. That there are many kinds of strength. That their mother couldn't shift properly either, and she still became Luna of 2 territories. Alara leaned into him, letting herself draw comfort from his certainty. The future was uncertain. Children with unknown abilities, a coalition still finding its footing, enemies who hadn't forgiven her for exposing their corruption, the constant weight of leadership and the knowledge that every decision affected thousands of lives. But she wasn't facing it alone. She had Dominic, had Lyra and Victor and Helena and a growing circle of people who'd chosen to stand with her, had a throne that had recognized something everyone else missed, had 23 years of surviving impossible odds that had taught her exactly how to keep surviving them. 1 year ago, she'd been a servant with no name, no family, no future. She'd sat on a throne by accident because her feet hurt, and her life had exploded into something unrecognizable. Now she was Luna, mother of a coalition, builder of systems meant to outlast her, living proof that power without accountability was just corruption wearing a crown. The drums sounded from the square below, the evening call to gather for the daily briefings Alara had instituted. Transparency in action. Citizens could attend, ask questions, understand exactly how their territory was being governed. It was one of dozens of reforms she'd implemented. Some worked perfectly, others needed constant adjustment. Leadership was messy and complicated and never finished. But it was hers, built from nothing by someone who'd been told she was nothing. Every day, she proved the throne hadn't made a mistake. Every decision she made honored her mother's sacrifice. Every wolf she helped showed that mercy and justice weren't weaknesses, but the foundations of real strength. Dominic's hand tightened around hers. "Ready to face your public?" "Always," Alara said. They descended to the square together. Luna and Alpha, foundling and rejected son. Two people who'd survived being told they weren't enough and built something better from the wreckage. The crowd was already gathering, common citizens and nobles mixing freely in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Young wolves like Mira watching with eager eyes, seeing possibilities their parents never imagined. Alara climbed the platform erected for these briefings. Dominic stood beside her, not behind, not in front, but equal. The partnership they'd forged in those desperate hours before the trials. "Good evening," Alara began, her voice carrying clearly. "Before we discuss today's business, I want to share something." She pulled out Blackwell's letter, read the relevant sections about transparency and leadership, explained how even their greatest enemy had eventually acknowledged that truth was stronger than corruption. The crowd listened in absolute silence. When she finished, an old woman in the back called out, "That took courage, sharing his final words even though he killed your mother." "It took acceptance that hatred doesn't build anything," Alara corrected. "Blackwell was wrong about almost everything, but he was right that I'll have to make hard choices as Luna. I just plan to make them with your knowledge instead of hiding them to protect my power." More questions came, about budgets and military positioning and diplomatic relations with territories outside the coalition. Alara answered each one honestly, admitting when she didn't know, explaining her reasoning when she did. This was leadership, not secret councils and hidden agendas, but open dialogue and shared decision-making, trusting people with truth even when truth was complicated or uncomfortable. It was terrifying and exhausting and absolutely necessary. As the briefing ended and the crowd dispersed, Alara remained on the platform watching her people return to their lives. She felt the weight of leadership settle more firmly on her shoulders, felt the presence of her unborn child, felt the ghost of her mother's sacrifice and the reality of what she'd built from it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, budget crises and political tensions, and the constant work of maintaining a coalition built on principles rather than fear. She would make mistakes, would face criticism, would have to make impossible choices between competing needs and limited resources. But she would do it with eyes open and hands clean, would face her people directly instead of hiding behind closed doors, would build systems meant to outlast her rather than systems designed to preserve her power. The throne hadn't chosen her because she was strongest or most qualified. It had chosen her because 23 years of invisibility had taught her to see what others overlooked. 23 years of powerlessness had taught her that real power came from serving rather than dominating. She was the Luna who rose from nothing, the servant who became a strategist, the broken girl who proved she was never broken at all, just becoming something the world hadn't seen before. And she was just getting started. Dominic's hand found hers in the growing darkness. "Time to rest. You've saved the territory, reformed the government, and inspired a generation. You're allowed to sleep occasionally." Alara smiled. "Just occasionally?" "I'm a demanding mate," Dominic said seriously. "I expect you to also eat regularly, accept help when needed, and stop trying to carry the entire coalition on your shoulders alone." "Impossible standards," Alara said, but she was laughing as they walked back toward the palace. Behind them, the square emptied slowly, citizens returning to homes that were safer than they'd been, children heading to schools that would teach them their worth, wolves of every background moving freely through streets that had once been divided by rigid class structures. It wasn't perfect, wouldn't be for generations, but it was better, and that was enough. The throne had known. Her mother had known. And finally, after 23 years of being told she didn't matter, Elara knew it too. She mattered. Not because of bloodline or magical power or divine recognition, though those things played their part, but because she'd survived, learned, and refused to become the kind of leader who'd crushed her. The Luna Protocol, they were calling her reforms, a new system for governance built on transparency and accountability. It would be studied, debated, adopted by some territories, and rejected by others. But it existed, a living monument to everyone who'd been told they didn't matter, proof that the invisible could become unforgettable, evidence that real strength lay not in power, but in how you used it. Elara looked up at the full moon rising over Silvercrest territory, felt its pull in her blood, felt her mother's presence in the mark on her chest, felt her child growing inside her. The future was uncertain. Leadership was hard. Change was slow. But for the first time in her life, Elara Ashwin knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. Build something worth defending. Lead with intelligence and mercy. Prove that the throne's recognition wasn't a mistake, but a revolution. She was Luna. She was ready, and the work had only just begun.